Hello everyone and welcome to another Arcane Mage video. In this video I'd like to go over 3 small changes that Blizzard has made to the Arcane Mage's talent tree in the last few days. And with those changes I think come some pretty significant ideas for Arcane going forward in Shadowlands. And the 3 I'd like to cover are the nerf to Overpowered, the swapping of Enlightened and Arcane Orb, and the swapping of Nether Tempest and Supernova. The nerf to Overpowered was expected. It was a talent that was chosen in BFA almost exclusively for any single target purposes, and often even in Mythic Plus when you wanted to maintain your burst alongside Rune of Power. Time Anomaly obviously had an adjustment as well, but that has been covered since in other videos, and this is not as recent a change as the one that they just made. But it was always lackluster. And Arcane Orb really served only an AoE purpose in most content in BFA, and so its competition with Overpowered and Time Anomaly in a final row was always a little bit skewed. So it is interesting to see that that Blizzard is trying to shake things up, and I just want to talk a little bit about what that might mean. We'll actually begin here with the change to Nether Tempest and Supernova. Now, tuning aside, these 2 talents on their own were rarely ever selected in BFA, and the reason for that is because Nether Tempest had to compete with Reverberate in earlier builds, and Reverberate just offered in a Mythic Plus setting or an AoE setting far more value for your talent choice, because you could produce less arcane explosions to get to that 4 arcane charge threshold. That was important because the more times you could cast Barrage with 4 charges in a 3 or more target setting, the better. You would do far more damage. And Reverberate essentially was a mana talent. So like Arcane Familiar, it was helping to smooth your rotation, because Arcane really depends on managing your mana a great deal. And in Mythic Plus settings, it wasn't quite as smooth as bursting from top to bottom and then evocating back up. Instead, you had to manage your mana a little more dramatically throughout a fight. So Reverberate was almost always chosen over Nether Tempest, and also this was partly due to the way that Nether Tempest scaled its damage. On really large pulls, like you can think of maybe Hive Mind, Nether Tempest's damage actually came back into the picture as something viable. But unfortunately, in the number of targets you would normally be dealing with, either in Mythic Plus or in raids, it never really offered enough damage in an AoE scenario. So hopefully they retune it, but they've decided to swap it between Supernova's earlier position and where Nether Tempest used to reside here in 35. And I think the reason we never took Supernova in part was because Resonance in an AoE scenario was so strong, offering our arcane barrages that much more bang for their buck. And we also had Charged Up at the time, which competed on the single target setup side. It just allowed us to maintain a certain mana percentage while we were above, and allowed us to get into better setups for our burst windows by being able to immediately generate 4 arcane charges and then go into a burst window with arcane power. Now that Arcane Echo is present, they have reshuffled this tier and put Tempest alongside Echo and Resonance. And I think this is somewhat interesting. Depending on how the tuning goes out for Tempest, Echo, and Resonance, the point here is something like Tempest offering us a sustained AoE presence for large mobs, or a large number of mobs. Echo offering us a kind of burst window to go together with our Touch of the Magi usage, which is fine, so sort of more of a burst AoE component, and then Resonance offering us more targeted AoE for maybe smaller packs or something that's connected to our Arcane Barrage usage. And at first glance, I'm going to say outside of any tuning, unless Nether Tempest is tuned, really overtuned, I think Resonance is going to continue to be the strongest contender here. In part because of some of the legendaries that are coming back for Arcane, and also just due to the way that we tend to spend our arcane charges in AoE scenarios. Echo will likely be the go-to single target default, because I don't see Resonance playing a significant role in your single target encounters, although it's fine. You will still be casting Arcane Barrage, but I just don't anticipate you're going to be trying to maximize the damage thresholds for multiple targets. Although in Cleave it's probably fine. I just think Arcane Echo tying it to Touch of the Magi is going to get your most bang for your buck probably in your single target scenarios. And then Nether Tempest, if it is tuned properly so that you can make use of this as a kind of arcane dot, I think it could see some use across all kinds of content, but I think unfortunately they're just trying to do too much with this ability, and historically it has not been tuned properly at all to take account for scaling of different secondary targets. So I would actually prefer this to be something that Arcane could leverage, and you could have a playstyle that tries to balance the use of Nether Tempest to generate procs of arcane missiles and to maintain your mana, these sorts of things. I just don't see Blizzard tuning it in that direction at the moment. So it's a curious change, and we'll see going forward how the tuning shakes out. On the 45 row, again, we have an interesting adjustment here. The AoE options available for Arcane have been rejuggled, and Arcane Orb is now competing with Reverberate. I think this is probably actually thematically a good change, although I'm going to be sad because we can't double dip now and make use of both the mana reduction that Reverberate offers us and smoothing our mana over AoE encounters, and the generation that Arcane Orb offered. With Arcane Orb and Mythic Plus, you would often begin this on the pull. You would hit your 6 or 7 mobs that it runs through, and it would offer you an immediate use of Arcane Barrage, and then you could go into your general spam, which would include hitting Arcane Explosion a few times to get back to that 4 Arcane Charge threshold. When these are competing now, our opening, depending on which one you choose, is going to be much different. Arcane Orb, of course, is still going to be really good, I think, in Mythic Plus for getting you that extra damage, the instant Arcane Charge cap on demand, and it's a low CD, so you have it for every single pull and often multiple times for different pulls. And so I think it will outclass Reverberate, because Reverberate's strength really is in sustained AoE, especially with 3 targets that you can hit. And I know historically, both within Mythic Plus and Raids, that often it's not an even distribution of damage, meaning you will have target priorities that need to be killed, and sometimes things will need to be CC'd away from one another, or all kinds of other sort of tactical problems that make Reverberate not as good as it looks on paper. You won't, in other words, always have the opportunity to hit all 3 targets, but this is a 10-yard radius that Arcane Explosion fires off, so it's worth it if you're new to Arcane to get a weak aura that lets you know when a target is in range of Arcane Explosion. That'll help you if you go to use Reverberate. Make sure that you're hitting your 3 targets. But I think this is just going to be weaker going forward in Shadowlands compared to having Arcane Orb now as an option here. And Supernova has always been a talent that is lackluster, like Tempest, just because the damage is not there. But what I think they're trying to get at here is you have an AoE component on a low CD, but it also offers you a little bit more crowd control and potentially extra damage on a primary target. So they're thinking Arcane Orb is just your straight, consistent damage, little burst of Arcane Charge, and you can hit everything and it does equal damage to all things. Supernova, if you really need to burst down and add, this is the one to go for on a low CD, and this, Reverberate, just more of that full-on, long-term sustain for the spec. I like that these are all in this position. I'm concerned about tuning, to be honest. I would love Supernova, as I said with Tempest, to be really tuned up a large degree. So instead of 30% spell power, I'd love to see it at 60% spell power. I know that sounds crazy, but if you look at where Arcane Orb scaling is, even just on this tooltip, at 109.2% scaling, there's just something really different about the way these two are operating. Orb itself has a lower CD, and the range of Supernova constricts it because you have to target a certain ability. The CC, in my money, is not as important a component to make it such a low spell power coefficient. So I'd love to see this try competing with Arcane Orb while retaining the flavor of being a CC option versus a more rotational option of offering you more arcane charges. And likewise with Nether Tempest, I wish it had better scaling as well. So that's the AoE, the new AoE Shadowlands orientation. I like it. I hope it stays because it gives some interesting choices, and it does free up a reorientation of the final row, which was a mixed bag for Arcane in general. To that end, I think the final row is probably going to make a lot of people feel sad because in single target you can no longer stack this Enlightened buff, which is essentially your equipoise talent, alongside Overpowered. Both of them essentially are nerfed by bringing them into the same row. And Time Anomaly, having had its changes, probably evens out this row in general. Obviously, Overpowered is playing into that playstyle of having a really significant burst window. So coupling this together with things like Rune of Power, for example, in a raid scenario where you definitely need to compress all of your damage into one moment, is excellent because it makes arcane power much stronger, although it has been nerfed. Time Anomaly being this sort of more consistent but RNG focused style where you are gaining different kinds of resources as you go, maybe haste here or there, maybe a burst of arcane power, maybe all of them together. Your evocation procs are going to keep you up in your mana so you can sustain it a little bit longer. Just an overall sort of RNG bucket. And then Enlightened giving you the opportunity to make good on Equipoise's playstyle by staying above a certain mana threshold. I think Enlightened, unfortunately, is not going to be as impressive unless the tuning just shows that it's always better to have this, and moving from 30% extra damage to 50 is just not as significant anymore. But I feel like this talent is going to be somewhat dead, and Time Anomaly may start to really return as a prominent piece. Part of the reason I say this is the changes to amplification, giving you an extra arcane missiles. Some of Arcane's legendaries, which offer you more playstyle oriented around the use of arcane missiles versus amplifications to Arcane Blast, make me think that we're going to have a Shadowlands Arcane Mage in raids for single target that focuses a lot more on using up arcane missiles and firing a ton of them off. So I think Time Anomaly might come out on top. But we'll have to see. Again, I think thematically it's probably a good thing that they have stuck these three in the final row together because they are obviously more oriented towards modifying the same type of gameplay, whereas Reverberate, Arcane Orb, and Supernova were certainly far more geared towards AoE specifically. So I'm glad that Arcane Orb has now moved away from that. We will stop having that scenario where Arcane Mages feel like they are choosing only entirely for single target versus AoE. Instead, they have some more clear choices as far as that is concerned. Anyways, I just want to make this quick video given that they made these changes recently, and just to talk through my thoughts on the changes both to the Tempest Nova switch and the Orb and Enlightened switch. I hope you enjoyed the video. We'll see you guys next time.